Thank you for coming. I really appreciate it. I'm Marilyn Minter, and this is the first drawing I could find. And it was in a Hans Christian Andersen fairy tale book. And I thought it was really funny that I drew a shoe. I was about 8 or 9 years old, I don't know. Because all the drawings that I could find, I found in the fly leaves of books we had at this old-fashioned library, and this is how I know that I used to draw when I was really young. And I thought that it was interesting that I drew these little profiles of girls that I learned to draw from Brenda Starr. I know you probably don't know who this is, but she was a comic book. And she was the girl reporter, and she was this intrepid girl reporter with a sparkle in her eye. And you'll notice that I'm practicing my handwriting on the right-hand side. And I was interested in this glamour early on, and I think it's because of my mother. And this is a picture of my mother, who was at one time a real beauty. But she, when my parents split up, she had a nervous breakdown and became pretty much a drug addict, and she was swanning around all the time in nightgowns and negligees, and at one time she was quite beautiful, and she thought of herself as still very beautiful, but it was a real off beauty. Like that was her and her wig. She had this problem with pulling out her hair, so she had to put wigs on, and we lived in this sort of fake French provincial apartment building in Fort Lauderdale, Florida at that time. And I was just down from school. I was at the University of Florida, and I just came down for a weekend. And I said, "Hey, Mom, will you pose for me?" And she said, "Sure." So she never even asked to see the pictures or anything. So it was not any really big deal. This is how she was day in and day out. I drove her car to school every day. And here she is without her wig, putting on lipstick, dyeing her eyebrows. And she watched TV all day. Or at night anyway, she watched programs like Dynasty and Dallas. And I was an undergraduate at University of Florida. And I took these pictures and I brought them, I'll go back. I brought them to the head of my department, just showing him what I did that weekend. And I had all these other students in the room with me. And they were like horrified by these pictures. This was before Oprah and before too much information, TMI. And it was like, this was a very conservative school. It was in upstate Florida. It was in Gainesville, and we were in Fort Lauderdale, which was, where you saw even then, it was where the places people went to escape. They went to Florida. And the story about Florida Man, now that Trump's down there. And it's really true. It was like, the land of no parents. My friends and I, we were just wild kids running around. Now, this next picture, I just wanted to show you because I know there's some students in the audience. And whenever you see an artist up on these podiums, they are showing you the absolute best they can do. And this is a pretty bad painting, but I'm teaching myself how to paint because I went to a school that just really didn't believe in. It was in the late '60s, and they really were invested in abstract expressionism, and they didn't care at all about pop art or conceptual art or anything, any kind of modernism other than Warhol and de Kooning, basically. And so I was teaching myself how to paint from other images that I cut out of magazines. So I wanted to show you this because it's a pretty bad painting, and this is how bad I was, and this is the best painting I could do that year. This is my junior year, and there could be, in every one of the slides I show you from now on, there could be 400 other images that were failures. So I've been honing this lecture for, 30 years, so this is the best I can do. So I wanted you to know how important it is to make mistakes and to fail at what you're doing, because that's what gets you to the point where you can be proud of what you're doing. So these are the first paintings that I did that I didn't destroy. And they were, this is like the photos I did in undergraduate. Then I went to Syracuse University, and then I came right straight to New York City. And this is the first body of work I did that I sort of liked, and it was in 1976. And I thought it was really interesting because this was when photorealism was a big deal in New York City. And I thought, I think I'm going to be a conceptual photorealist. I was going to, paint things that were, not that spectacular, because everything you saw were real, technical masturbation and really good, like you get close to it and it looked just like a photograph. And I thought, I'll be really smart, and I'll paint black and white photographs. And so that's how I was thinking. And these are, I was a photography major in school, so I took these pictures of the things I wanted to paint. And then I would take the images to galleries in slide form, and they say, yes, you're a photorealism, but a really boring one. Which might be true. Everything was shiny balls and, gloriously painted kind of flashy things, and this was a spill of coffee. And I thought, I was brilliant because I was painting these black and white photos. I just made them slightly bigger than a real 8x10. And in those days, this was 1976, 77, you really, maybe this is 78, you really, all photographs were not color photos. They were all black and white 8x10s. And I wanted to make sure you knew it was a photo, so I left the raw canvas around it. And when I had my retrospective, I showed these to the curators. They went, these are great. I want to show these in the retrospective. I said, I have every single one of them. Nobody wanted them or they were interested at all, so I actually had it all. So that was, I was still a very ambitious girl, which I was a very ambitious girl my whole life, growing up in Florida, and which didn't really fit into the Southern vernacular. I was sort of an oddball, even, all the way through. Like when I took those pictures of my mom, I was really shamed for taking those pictures because nobody took pictures like that and showed them around in class. And it made me feel like, oh my God, I'll never show these again. So I really didn't show them. And I was just shamed, and now I think about my brothers and I, we look at those pictures of my mom and we don't see what you see. All we see is our mother. So we didn't really see what everybody else was seeing, and we still don't till this day. But I know that this was of a time, and it was a picture of high-end addiction. And you weren't used to seeing high-end addiction. You saw, junkies with needles in their arms, nodding out on the streets. So what brings me to this is that's the kind of work I was doing, that there were sort of minimalists and then these minimalist photorealism, and nobody was paying any attention, and I was an ambitious person. And so I thought, well, we're getting into 1980s now, and I thought, I saw all of this German Expressionism coming to New York City, and I really wanted to be part of the vernacular. I didn't want to be an outsider. So I thought, well, I'll just start working with a German artist who was sort of well known at the time. His name was Christoph Kohlhofer. And we did these, I wanted to being a showing artist, so I sort of still used my skill level, because early on I should have told you that at the very beginning when I was doing those drawings. I really taught myself how to be able to draw anything. I could copy anything. So we just painted on top of one another. And this is like where I really had this big, I just decided, my skill level was useless. I had this, it was an easy thing for me to do. It wasn't hard. So I'm going to just give it up and work as in this kind of a collaboration. It was Kohlhofer and Minter collaboration, and we showed in the East Village, and we got a lot of attention, but we fought so much because we were painting on top of one another. And I don't know if you know any artists, but I can guarantee you every one of us are soul-suckingly self-involved. and to have someone painting on top of you creates a lot of tension, and so everyone just assumed we were going to break up because we fought so much, and we did. But this is the kind of paintings we did. But because I worked with him, I sort of gave up that skill. I thought it's not going to do me any good. I don't really, yes, I could do this. So how can I? But I knew art was about ideas. It wasn't about a skill level. So I sort of cleaned up my act, and this is the first painting I did when I sort of left the old, the bad old days of the East Village and the punk scene. And this was the first one I didn't destroy. And I was thinking in terms of, and I learned how to do this because of the collaborator that I worked with, because he was in school with Sigmar Polka, who took images and projected them and painted from them. So I learned that from him, and I took this really famous photo of Sophia Loren and Gina Lollobrigida, and I put it on an angle, and I just turned the projector on, and I started working with enamel paint, because I knew that I couldn't make anything that looked like the collaboration. I had to make something that looked absolutely fresh and new. And once I saw enamel, once I started working with it, I just fell in love with it. So the little painting on the right is a silk screen with acrylic on top. It's acrylic glaze. And this was called Big Girls. And on the other side of the room, the same technique, only, I just distorted I took the projector at an angle and painted the dots. And this is when I started hiring assistants, because the projector would be on while we were working, and so I had assistants paint some of these dots. So it was the Big Girls, and these were pictures I got out of an encyclopedia, and they were about distortion. So these are the little girls. So that image that's in the on the left-hand side, that's inside the fractured picture of Sophia and Gina Lollobrigida. And I was thinking in terms of Sophia Loren, and Jane Mansfield. I was thinking in terms of competition between women and how that manifests itself, and how the distortion starts happening when you're very, very young. And so I had a whole series of these little girls looking in funhouse mirrors on the other side of the Big Girls, and the only time I could put it together was when I had my retrospectives. And so what ended up happening is I started letting the enamel paint drip. And I had this idea that I wanted to make, this was in 1989, and I had this idea that I wanted to make a TV commercial. And I advertised the show I was doing and I had about a year to put this together. And I went to cookbooks, and I took images out of the cookbooks. They were all mostly black and white, and I painted them. And then I had my assistants do the dot screen. And it was like these images that I thought were very metaphorical for sex and violence, really. But my whole purpose of making them was so that I could trade for production value to do a TV commercial. And the TV commercial was to be advertised on late night television, because I found out that you could really do you could buy 30 seconds on David Letterman, Arsenio Hall. Now, I'm just going to ask the audience, how much do you think 30 seconds in 1989, 1990 cost to get 30 seconds on on television? Now, I'm a starving artist, right? So this really shocks people to this day. Even it was only $1,800. Because you're really not buying the United States. You're buying that market. You're buying the tri-state area. So when I did it in L.A., I had to buy it in L.A., and I had shows on either side of the country, and also in St. Louis, same thing. But I still wanted to run the ads of the commercial. So here it is.
In which our effort in the Middle East collapses.
Let me ask you just to take a break for a second. We've got to take a quick break, and I'll come back and let you continue that thought when we continue our conversation with Henry Kissinger and James Webb in a moment.
to stop it here. I'm not going to show you the Letterman one, but the point is that I paid production with giving people those food, I call them food porn. I call it 100 food porn and the commercial because that was when the late night television would have these escort services called 1-900, and they were on during Letterman and late night TV. So, that brings me up to letting this paint drip and then trying to, the whole idea was to let it look like this expressionism because the paint, enamel paint does drip naturally, and then trying to hold it together with the dot screen, which is sort of this fake mechanization. And so I started using, well, then I saw, this was 1990, and I saw this work from Mike Kelly at Metro Pictures, and everyone knows Mike Kelly, I hope, in the audience, but these were really interesting, and I thought they were just so brilliant, this intellectual from California who made paintings out of stuffed animal sculptures and stuffed animal paintings. He actually sewed them together and put them on a wall like a painting, and candles and felt. And I thought, wow, this is brilliant. And I thought, this is like, showing a kind of mall culture for an adolescent teenage girl. And this is a real thing, and I know this is real. And he had a decoupaged chest of drawers, and he had a how-to sex manual taped to the bottom. I don't know if anyone ever saw that. And a mirror so you could see that. That was a teenage girl exploring things, or 12-year-old or pre-adolescent. And I thought, if a woman artist made any of this, nobody would pay any attention to her. This is 1990, and I thought, what subject matter have women artists never tackled? That only male artists seem to work with, and because this is really, he made a thing of something I know is real and true, and that what hit me was pornography. Women artists never had tackled pornography, never made images, except for the few that I knew, and I only knew two. I knew Carolee Schneemann and Judith Bernstein, and I knew her screws, her drawings of screws. So I thought, well, that's softcore. I got to do hardcore. So I did cum shots. And this was 1991, 92. This was made in 1989. But I was in the middle of political correctness. And I really believed that nobody had politically correct fantasies. And I thought it was really interesting. And I was asking questions. Does it change the meaning? This is called the Supremes. I said, does it change the meaning when a woman makes these images? And I was asking these questions, but I wasn't giving answers because no one had made that I knew about. I mean, Betty Tompkins was working, but we didn't know about each other. And there were all these artists, but women never owned agency or production of sexual images. And I thought, this is what women should. It's time for them to make images for their own pleasure and their own amusement. But this was the middle of political correctness, and it really, really upset people. And I knew it was fear because I came from that feminist background. I was always an activist. And I said, that here I am repurposing an abusive history and trying to own it and making it mine. And what does that mean? But the art world was outraged, and I literally got excoriating reviews, and my show closed early. I got threats from early trolls, but early trolls, that was just telephone calls. I've been trolled since because I work with Planned Parenthood all the time, but nothing like the trolling today, That was just stupid people. And so I was feeling really beat up. And I thought, I thought to myself, I just naturally started beating up my paintings because that's how I was feeling. And I took the same images, but I put acid on the metal, and I took a belt sander to the paintings. I painted them, then I wrecked them. And that was my idea, how to get, just how do I make myself happy? And so I was making these paintings, so they were making me really happy to do. And, I sort of, on a very gradual scale, I started working myself out of this imagery because nobody was paying any attention, and I sort of had this nascent career that was doing pretty well. I mean, those food porns, I sold all of them practically, and then I couldn't sell anything or even get a gallery to want to show me. So I started working with the enamel. I sort of reclaimed my skill level, which I thought was useless. And I thought, well, then what I'm going to do now is take images from the culture that everybody knows are true, but you've never seen an image of it before, like dyeing your hair or letting the hair grow out under your armpit, or taking the socks down and there's lines in your leg. And I thought, okay, everybody knows these things are true. And then I was thinking, oh, well, this is what all of my work is really about nowadays. Although I was working from my own photos, and but they took so long to make these paintings. This is called Treasure Trail. They took forever because I was trying to teach myself this new technique with enamel paint, which is layers and layers of enamel. And I'm painting all by myself. And I had shows. I had finally started getting shows again. Oh, the interesting thing is, I think, I got let back in the art world because in 1995, I showed the pictures of my mother for the first time since I took them in 1969. And what I saw was this cliche kind of like, oh, wow, if you look like you come from dysfunction, then people take you seriously as an artist. Which was true. And what are cliches, right? Kittens are adorable. So I started clawing my way back in. And I started making this body of work, but I couldn't fill up a gallery, so I started showing photos at the same time. And these are the photos that I took, but they seemed perfect, so I didn't make paintings of them. I just showed them with clips because the paintings were on metal and these were clipped and they were big photos. And so this is how I could fill up a show because I would take months to do one painting. So then I started combining the two, photos and paintings in the same gallery, mainly because I just could not fill a gallery. So this is a photo, armpit. And they were all still things you know about. You do have dirty, even you can have a great pedicure, but your feet could get dirty, you walk around. And then I started working with fashion tropes, like they would have women kissing eggs and kissing and slowly kissing jewelry in some of the fashion magazines. So I made the models bite into the eggs. I took what was already there and I just pushed it. Or the model would shove the jewelry in her mouth until she started gagging, and I shot then. I started shooting then. So I was just taking things that already existed in popular culture. Because everything, I started thinking about, okay, so I worked with pornography, which was something that was contemptible. And I thought, well, fashion's pretty contemptible too, but fashion and glamour. But, it's so shallow. It's considered so stupid and shallow. And I would have friends that were academics, and they would hide their magazines when they had parties. I saw that. And I thought, yeah, but at the same time, this is an industry that is the one place where, women have power. And at the same time, it creates body dysmorphia. And it's the one place that's like $1 billion industry, but everyone has such contempt for it. Fashion is, fleeting, and Cocteau said that we must forgive fashion everything because she dies so young. And I thought the same thing with pornography. It was so contemptible, yet it's still at the same time there would be no internet without pornography. So these are like, it's like the world tricks us in a way. Like here are these two of these giant industry of fashion and glamour. And at the same time, we're in a world where, everything human is shot with imperfection. Everything human. But we live in a world that's trying to constantly erase imperfection. And it's making us sicker And it's not making us perfect. It's making us really unhealthy. So I didn't feel like, I always want to take a picture of what is, because I know at the same time fashion gives people so much pleasure. And it's so creative and so interesting. And glamour, the same thing. And I love looking at these images. I love looking at magazines. Yet I do know all the other side of it. It's just like everything we have in the world is like it's gray areas. Everything is like on a rainy night in New York City, this is what's going to happen to your very expensive shoes. So and this is like my sort of rediscovery in 2006, where I was in the Whitney Biennial, and at the same time, these are my photos at the time. And then I made this painting. This is a really big painting. Same kind of imagery. But they're like huge paintings at this point, and it was really killing me. So I started having assistants. And all the paintings at this point were combinations. I really, once I saw Photoshop, I was sold. I thought, wow, I'm never going to draw again, which is exactly what happened. And everything was a combination. So this is one of those jewels is from one negative, the heels from one negative, the platforms from another negative, and I just combined them. So I had this show at the Whitney, and I was in the show at the Whitney Biennial, and then these billboards were up at the same time from the Creative Times. So we had this really kind of solid reintroduction into the art world. These were billboards right in Chelsea, which is where the art world at this point in 2006 was located. And these are some of the paintings that I did in the Whitney. And these are pretty big paintings and lots and lots of negatives, maybe like 15 at this point of layers of Photoshop. And some more kind of big ones. These are photos. This is a photo. Now, at this point, if you saw the photos and you saw them next to the paintings, you'd know right away which was the painting, which is the photo. Because with this technique that I've developed, it is really layers and layers of paint, and it's much richer and deeper. And why I use enamel is because it's thin, and you can see. My assistants and I, we really think of ourselves as sculptors, really thin sculpture, because you can see the colors underneath. They come through. And it's like pentimento, and we're like, I'm so OCD anyway. I know that that's not the right word. I don't know the politically correct way to describe that, but I really am a sort of someone who's a constructivist, and I think really hard about everything I make, and the surface has to be absolutely perfect before I let it go out of the studio. But I love the layering that I could get, this array of colors that I couldn't get with oil or acrylic. So, and this is the beginning of this freckle series. So I'm going to quickly go through. I have a lot of videos to show you, so quickly go through the freckles, because it was one of those things in the fashion world that was constantly being retouched. You never saw freckles. If you see them now, guess why? Me. Or dirt, or really messy makeup, I thought that was like what happens to your makeup if you go to sleep in it, I had done it myself. This is a painting, but, this is like, people look like this, we never see pictures of it. So then I got into doing freckles and bubbles. So this is my first bubble, and I was practicing with it. And then this next one is, now I see how to work this. This is a real close-up of one. Then this point, I use my hands, I bash things, I use all my fingers are two fingers, but this is just one fingerprint of a painting. And so I'll show you what this comes out to be. A friend of mine made this video. So I thought that was pretty interesting, actually. And then here's the painting. So I was doing these bubbles and freckles, same model. I would find certain models and work with them all the time. And then one day, I'm getting out of the subway on a rainy day, and I see this, and I really am one of those artists that's totally intuitive, even though surface means everything to me, and getting close-up, the reason I use so much close-up is because I really am allergic to narrative. And I like metaphor. I'm really only interested in metaphor, or double meanings, or triple meanings, or other, people. I want you to bring your own history and experience when you see my work, so when you recognize it. And I saw this tongue on a shopping bag, and it had yellow on it, like food. And I thought, oh, I wonder what it would look like if I made images of painting with my tongue. And, just like, I thought, oh, licking, painting, what that would look like. So I started shooting it. And then while I was shooting it, these are some of the stills I got. While I was shooting it, my makeup artist took my camera, this really cheesy camera I did to do early to just see my lighting, and went underneath and started taking a video of what it looked like. And I thought, oh, this is really interesting. I wonder what it would look like if behind glass. Like, this is a way to keep, so you're not telling people exactly what to think. And so this is when this whole body of work started happening behind glass. And I got invited by MAC Cosmetics to do, a bunch of artists got invited to do an ad for them. And so between them, I didn't tell them this, but I got my models. I said, well, who has the longest tongue? And, and I wanted models with freckles. So that's how I hired the people. And then between me shooting their ad for their eye makeup, I said, can you come over and lick this candy on glass? Because it's all candy and vodka mixtures. And why vodka? Because it's more viscous than water. And the makeup artist taught me this. Now, these are huge paintings. These are 15 feet by 10, and they're 80 layers of Photoshop to go in to make, and it takes us a year to make each one of these. So I'm going to go through these pretty quickly. And then this was my show at Reagan Projects in LA. And that's just to give you an idea of the size. But this is the video I made. And Mac was furious when they saw this. Because they paid for it. Now this is a promo, and I went to all the movie theaters, and I asked them if I could put this in between their ads. And, for ads for next movies, I wanted it to be a preview. But the only place that would do it was Landmark. So it was at the Landmark Theater between ads. And then, let's see, what happened next? Creative Time put it in. That was just a promo that went in the ad, and it would show, like, late at night only. And then the whole full 8-minute video was in Creative Time in Times Square at the MTV billboards. And then Madonna bought it and then used it as their first song for Sticky and Sweet on that tour. And then the MoMA bought it. I mean, I gave it out. I mean, it was, you can get this for $40 from my gallery, but I didn't edition it because nobody knew me as a video artist. So I use it all the time, the whole 8-minute one. And then Mac was really happy when MoMA put it in their lobby for a year. So anyway, I was working with a friend of mine, and I really started playing around with what happens with this. I love the way it coats the tongue, this vodka. This is a friend of mine, this is Wangechi Mutu, and she was pregnant at the time. And she wanted me to document her pregnancy, but we were just playing around. She styled herself. And, I didn't want to kill my model, so she spit this out because it was vodka, and she was 8.5 months pregnant. And I love the paintings I got out of this. It took about a year to do each one of them. So then but everything from now on, I got just addicted to making things behind glass. And I love the idea of old ads being on the street or on bus stops, and it's a rainy night. And these are really, really, really big paintings. They all went at Reagan Projects. They went to my next show there. This is another 15-footer. But I love what happens on the other side of the glass, and I love the idea of having. That's a photo. I made all of these photos at the same time, and this is a promo for this the next video I made, and I was in this show called Killer Heels, but I was in a show with artists like Nick Knight and Stephen Meisel and Stephen Klein. I mean, visual artists were in it also, but I knew that they would be really slick and really perfect. These perfect. They gave us a certain amount of money. Everybody got a certain amount of money, and we all had the same size. But I wanted to work off of the opposite of very slick and very glamorous. This is Smash, and this is also just 1 minute. This is the interesting part. The sound. Listen to the sound for this, because it's really a great story. This was a long time ago, and at the time I used this Phantom. Nobody was using it. Now it's on every commercial. But I just love slow-mo, and this is like 800 frames per second. And that was for Killer Heels at the Brooklyn Museum. And you really can't tell, but the music is so great. You can't tell from that, but my composer was this young kid who really wasn't doing anything. And one of my collectors knew him and knew who he was, and said, "Well, why don't you work?" And saw the video and said, "You should do the sound for Marilyn Minter's video." So he came over at night. He was working on a Chris Rock movie, and he worked at night. And I knew he had done this. I knew he was the producer for this band called Childish Gambino, but they weren't out yet. Nobody knew about Childish Gambino, and so he was the producer for that. He was 28 years old. And then he ended up being their producer, and then he won a Grammy for Best Record. And then he went on to do Black Panther. His name is Ludwig Göransson, and he just got the Oscar for the sound for Black Panther. But I knew him when. And he was so great, and he worked for nothing. And I gave him a print, I gave him a photo just because he was so great and so sweet to work with. Anyway, I love that story. So I'm really proud of him. Now he wouldn't return my phone calls now, I'm sure. So I was still, I was working behind glass, and I was really getting into working like with showers, the idea of a shower. And that's where I'm sort of working with right now. But I was going to just show you how my technique works. These are some of the photos. Now this is how I make a painting. The top one is a photo I took in 2000. So I took that photo, I just taped it to a wall, and then I took a piece of graffiti glass that was cracked, and I put it on top, and I shot it, and I played with lights so the bottom is that same photo after I worked a lot in Photoshop to make the painting. This is a really big painting. This is 15 feet, another woman. And I was really thinking, in terms of a rainy night and driving and seeing an old ad billboard, coming back from the city, coming back from the airport anyway, because I saw these billboards, these old ads behind glass, and they were cracked, and that gave me the idea. So that's another painting I made from that same series. And here's another one. And this is another 12-footer. So I was really into that, like old ads being abandoned. I see them all over Manhattan, just on storefronts, and what it would look like if it was a rainy night. Now here's one I'm going to just show you the whole the whole mechanics of this. This is a finished painting, but this is the image I shot. I mean, I showed you the same model eating, biting into eggs, and she was one of my students, covered in freckles, and then I took that same photo, I put a piece of glass in front, and this is the first one. And there was so much graffiti on it that it's got all schmutzy. That's what I called it, schmutz, because the graffiti, the spray paint got mixed up with the water, and it ran, so I hated the way it looked. But this is the bones. So the first thing I did was on the right, I changed the circle in the graffiti, and then I changed the V in the graffiti. So there's the first one. Whoops, sorry, I went ahead. Yeah, that was the bones, and then the next vision of it, and then I painted this entire left side, and then I sanded it all off and put this in instead, this is why it takes a year, because this is another 15-footer. And it takes, a really, really long time to get this to work. And so here's the bones of it, the beginning, and that's the end, the last painting. So I hope you can see, and then the work that goes into it. But I started working with frozen glass and the breath of life, I was thinking, because this is like a picture of what it's like to breathe. So this whole series is about breathing. This is a painting. The last one was a photo. And my last show in New York City was mostly just breathing on glass and touching your tongue to frozen glass. These are pretty big. And then, lo and behold, I started thinking about, I was meeting all these young girls who were lasering their pubic hair off. And I thought, I teach, so I know all these young kids. I thought, that's crazy, fashion is fleeting, and you want to be a baldy when you're 80, And I thought, well, I'm going to take pictures of pubic hair, and I'm going to do all the races and all the colors of skin, and I want to show people that it's really can be quite beautiful. So these are some of the photos that I took. This is a natural redhead. And I had to wait 8 months for some of my models to grow out their pubic hair. Now, granted, anyone under 30 has never seen pubic hair in this audience, but it's, I just wanted to make it look so beautiful you could put it in your living room. And this is a collector who has it over their fireplace, but most people don't know what it is. And I made this whole series of paintings that I love, and I think they're great. But no one goes near them. I've never sold one. No, I have sold them, but very rarely. I mean, people are interested in them, then they find out what it is. But I think they're just gorgeous. And I think of them, art historians are going to make fun of me, but I think of them as my Bolsinius series, because they're really big paintings. So I'm going to eventually put them all together in a room, and they're going to look great, maybe 10 years from now or something. Because no one's going to want them. No one ever wants them. But I'm not going to stop painting them. So then I got into this 21st century bathers series, which is what I'm doing now, because you always see all the bathers in all of art history, and they're everywhere. They're all painted by men, but really it was before photography, so it was sort of like, it was about objectifying women, which is fine, because that's very sexy. But, I thought, well, would it look like if a 21st century bather. How would I change that? There's a few women that worked with grooming, painting women grooming. And I wanted to be one of them. So I'm doing this. I'm actually doing a show in France, believe it or not, of the Bather series. So I think it's sort of fun. But this is the first ones that I did. And I just like the idea of women, doing what they wanted to do. Here's the show I had. It's funny because I have these shows at my gallery in New York, but they look so much better in LA because of her space. So all the images I'm showing you are in my LA gallery. So the one on the right, nobody knows what that is. I called it cornucopia. Oh yeah, I'm going back. Okay, I think, yeah. So then Trump got elected, and I got really pissed off. So I thought, oh, well, if they're going to call us cunts, then I'm going to shove it down your throat. So these are the stills from the next video I'm going to show you. These are, and I just took, it's called My Country 'Tis of Thee. And these are stills, No Country for Old Men. I just, using the word. So here we go. This is just another promo because the video is 8 minutes long. I found this model on what's that? Get out of there. Yeah. On Instagram. I just love her. And so that was a quick version of it for some reason, but I think there might be one more. I don't know. No, these are just the bathers again. So this is what I'm doing now, and it's for a show at MoCo in Montpellier, Nicolas Bourriard's. But I think it's perfect to have it in France, the 21st century bathers. And this one I used the redhead, and I was really thinking of the Pre-Raphaelites, but somehow, putting them in the shower. But it got too pretty, so I'm making one now, and it just was so pretty that I couldn't stand it. So I changed it, and I think I have it here. I like the idea of the distortion and how it changes everything with the lights that happen in the shower. And these are ones that no one's seen. I'm going to show them in France for the first time, and they took a really long time to do, but I just love them. Okay, here's the one that, it was the painting on the left, but I just hated it. So I'm working on it now, and now it's fitting into the painting on the right. I think that's not the last one, but it's getting there. And these are all works in progress, just strictly works in progress. Layers and layers. And this, I'm going to be done in a second. I think, and then this is the last thing I shot, which is a week ago. And it took me a week to do each one of these, and I'm just about to start painting them. And I think that's it. So. Well, thank you for that applause. And do you have any questions? Because we're doing a Q&A now.
I hope I can articulate this. Would you be willing to talk a little bit about your mother and how she may or may not be reflected in your work? Early on, you talked about distortion.
Yeah.
And now I'm noticing there's a lot of mirrors and glass and some of the photographs that you took of her definitely involved.
That is definitely my vision. It is, truly. It was glamour, but it was really fucked up glamour. My mother was an addict,
right? And so there was that layer of distortion.
Yeah, and then she had acrylic nails, but she didn't clean them, so they get fungus. She pulled out her hair. It was just not. It was not real. It was just this kind of bastardization of glamour. And I never thought of this, but one of the critics called me the pathology of glamour. What I was doing is the pathology of glamour. And it's not, I'm not really trying to distort things that they're ugly, but there is a kind of ugly beauty. And the name of my retrospective was Pretty Dirty, but that's life, There are no safe places, and everything does entropy, it decays. And you just and the striving for perfection is not making us healthy. So I just want to make a picture of that, probably because I lived with my mother. But I don't ever go and get this analyzed. That's my eye. It's always been my eye. It's always been my vision. And it's not like I have a choice in the matter. I've never shot a whole human being. I'm always doing close-ups because it just doesn't interest me. Does that answer your question?
For sure. I looked at your photographs and I thought of Diane Arbus immediately.
Well, she was, this is the interesting story because everyone thinks she was my teacher. She wasn't my teacher. She was a visiting artist. I went to this very romantic conservative school in University of Florida, and I was a lowly undergraduate. And the graduate students, she was their teacher, but she hated everything. Because my school was so romantic. I mean, my teacher, the head of the department, was this exquisite technician. And he did this mixing, it's almost like what I'm doing in Photoshop now, but taking two negatives and printing them on one piece of paper. And there would be like shells in the sky and then the ocean underneath. And it's very, very romantic. And she just hated everything. So I was just walking by one day, and he said, "Marilyn, come here. Show these pictures of your mother." I didn't even print them. I only showed her the proof sheets. And she really liked them. But I didn't know who she was, and I didn't know anything about her. And then until 2 years later, when I was in grad school, she killed herself. And it was in Life magazine. And that's how I found out who it was. So she was never my teacher, but she did pat me on the back. But if I didn't know who she was, it didn't do anything for me.
I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about how you see the role of women in the art world, how it's changed from the 80s to today, and just...
Well, there's still a huge discrepancy, but I want to, all the women that we ever read about, they, up until the last few years, I mean, the art world loves young bad boys and really old ladies. And the ones who about, like Louise Nevelson and Louise Bourgeois and Helen Frankenthaler, I mean, they were fucking pioneers. They were amazing women. They could not be mediocre. And sooner or later, it's going to balance out. Hopefully we see, all the people that have been the other, all the ones you read about now are pretty spectacular. But how it's changed, there's still a real glass ceiling when it comes to one thing specifically, and that's women working with sexual agency. That really freaks out everybody. But other than that, it's finally starting to even out a little bit, and it's a really wonderful, healthy thing. And I make a point of going against my instincts, and I tell you this because I'm sure there's some young women in this audience that. I think we're really programmed to be very competitive with one another because it was only, for years and years and years, it was only that one spot, or they were totally erased. They were working. I mean, Cézanne had all these women students. Not Cézanne, I'm sorry. Matisse had all these women students, but you never heard about any of them. But, if you read his biography, he had all these women students. And, our nature is, whenever I see another good woman artist, I hate her immediately. I want her to die. And what I do, because I don't want that poison, it's like eating poison and then waiting for the other person to die, is I make myself go over and tell the artist how great they are. And just by saying it, the poison drains and it's gone, and I have a new colleague friend. So I just want to rethink everything, like rethink the way we automatically, I hate that we just do things so, we can't deal with the gray area, and and this is like, the way I said that about women, men are our allies, I think there's always another side. I want to always look at that other side and keep it interesting for me. I would also, whenever I see a male artist that's really good, I'm jealous of them too. You know, I mean, I'm a competitive artist, but the same thing, if I tell them how great they are, I don't hate them anymore. And I say that that's really something we should do. We should rethink, why is it in this culture we really build up these young women like Taylor Swift or Miley Cyrus or Lena Dunham, and then the culture just tears them apart. And we can't be, I think as women, we have to rethink like what's going on. Like, you know, I don't know who she is, but she's a billionaire, and that's Kylie Jenner Kardashian. But I don't know too many 21-year-old billionaires. But she's like, everyone hates her. But she is she made she's head of an industry at 21. We got to rethink this. Why do we tear down women all the time? So that's not at all the answer to your question. But women artists have to like each other a little better. That's what I'm trying to say. You got to read 9th Street Women. It is so good. Any other questions? I guess that's it then.
Thank you, Marilyn.
Thank you.